Have you ever felt at home, but completely lost inside? At first glance, everything seems to be in place. The walls are the same, the smell of coffee still fills the kitchen in the morning, and the welcome hugs are sincere, tight, emotional. But inside you, something is broken. Something was trapped in another time, in another place. It's as if a part of you decided not to return, even when your body was already back home. I came home, but something inside me never came back. This phrase echoes in the hearts of thousands of soldiers returning from war, heroes acclaimed in the streets but completely silent inside, applauded on the outside but haunted on the inside. And perhaps, even without ever being on a battlefield, you too know this feeling, being surrounded by people and yet feeling alone. Stay with me until the end, because what you are about to discover now may surprise you. The world applauds the return, photos, speeches, medals, flags. But no one sees what happens after the doors close and silence takes over the room. No one hears the noise of thoughts, the screams that were kept hidden, the images that repeat themselves like a film that cannot be paused. That is when the invisible scars begin to bleed. And no matter how hidden they are, they hurt as if they were opened every day. Have you ever stopped to think about how many battles a soldier continues to face even after the war is over? Many return with their bodies intact, but their souls in pieces. They carry the weight of memories that no one else has seen, of losses that no one can understand. They sleep in clean beds, but they keep waking up in the middle of the night, as if they were in the middle of a bombing. And when they try to explain, words fail them, because it's not just about what they saw, it's about what they felt. It's about what left a mark. In this video, you will hear a true story, a story that may seem distant, but that may touch you closer than you think, because all of us, at some point, have fought our silent wars. And maybe, just like this soldier, you are also trying to relearn how to live, to breathe, to reconnect with life, even with pain knocking at the door. It doesn't matter if your battle was on the battlefield or inside your own mind. What unites all these stories is what they teach us about resilience, courage, and the power to try again, to get up, even when your heart is broken, to take a step, even when fear is on your back. So if you've ever felt like no one understands what you carry inside, stay here. If you know someone who came back different after a loss, a war, a trauma, stay here, because sometimes all we need is to know that we're not alone. And from now on, you will immerse yourself in this journey. A journey that begins with the return home, but that reveals a path full of silences, shadows, and, who knows, redemption. The real war begins in silence. It's when everyone thinks everything is fine, because you're back, because the danger has passed, because now it's normal life, that the battle intensifies inside you. The dark room becomes a trench. Any noise, a smell, a memory, everything becomes a trigger. And then comes the emptiness, the guilt of having returned, the fear of not being able to feel anymore, the weight of smiling without wanting to. And that's when many people give up talking, because it seems like no one will understand. But understanding is exactly what we need, because when someone shares their pain, other people recognize themselves, and that saves. If this topic resonates with you, leave a comment below with what has touched you the most so far. It could be a thought, a feeling, a memory. It could even be silence. Sometimes what you write helps someone who is on the other side of the screen, struggling in silence, thinking they are alone in this. And if this content made you think or connected with you in some way like this video, this simple gesture helps the message reach further and touch more hearts. Your participation here is what makes this channel grow and reach more people with this type of story, stories that deserve to be heard. And of course, if you want to continue following these real, profound, and transformative narratives, subscribe to the channel. This is where we give a voice to those who have been silenced by pain. This is where we meet to talk about what no one has the courage to say out loud. Because together, with empathy and truth, we transform silence into strength. And this is where the story continues. His name is Daniel. He is 32 years old, father of a 5-year-old boy, husband of Julia, son of Dona Nena, the woman everyone on the street knows as the mother who waited for her son to return from the war. When Daniel stepped back onto the sidewalk of the house where he grew up, people shouted his name from the window. The street was filled with neighbors, applause, and tears. The country's flag was waving on the balcony of the neighbor's house across the street, and little Miguel ran toward his father with open arms, as if he could rescue, in that embrace, all the days that had been trapped in time. It was a beautiful return, the kind that makes you cry without realizing it. But it was also a silent return, because inside, something was out of place. In the early days, Daniel smiled in the photos, shook the hands that were extended to greet him, heard the same phrases repeated dozens of times. "You are a hero. We are proud. Now it is time to rest." And he nodded in agreement. But something in his chest remained tense, as if his body had returned, but his heart was still on its knees in a trench that no one could see. This is where the story changes tone, because what the eyes see is not always what is actually happening. The hidden truth lies in the small details, in the way he reacted to sudden sounds, how he avoided eye contact for too long, or how he suddenly fell silent when someone asked, "So, how was it over there?" The war inside him had no flags waving, nor medals on his chest. It was a war fought in silence at night between the pillow and the memories that came back without asking permission. Daniel had returned, but something inside him was still there. This is the point at which many give up trying to understand. After all, he is home, isn't he? He has food on his plate, a warm bed, a healthy child. So why can't he sleep? Why can't he smile with the same brightness as before? Why, when he hears the sound of a lid falling to the floor, does his body react as if it were on high alert? This is not called weakness. It is impact. It is what happens when the mind tries to protect itself from a truth that was too great to be processed all at once. The transformation that war causes does not end with the signing of a paper or the end of a mission. It continues to echo in decisions, reactions, and the way we see the world and the people around us. Julia, his wife, noticed this first. She was the one who noticed that Daniel was taking longer to shower, as if he was using the water not only to wash his body, but to try to erase what his soul still carried. She was the one who woke up several times in the middle of the night and found her husband sitting on the edge of the bed, his eyes lost in the darkness, as if he were listening to sounds that weren't there. It wasn't easy to understand. It wasn't easy to talk, and that made everything even more lonely. As the days went by, his smile became shorter. His meetings with friends became more spaced out. The television became louder, as if in an attempt to drown out his own thoughts. He avoided parties, crowds, and closed spaces, not out of fear, but because of something harder to name, a constant discomfort, as if he were always out of place, as if he were a stranger in his own home. It is at this point that we realize that there are pains that do not appear in exams, that the greatest battlefield can be the mind, and that silence many times is a stifled scream. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because what Daniel is experiencing is more common than it seems, but few people realize it. The technical name may vary: post-traumatic stress disorder, combat trauma, or just invisible scars. But the feeling is the same. The feeling of being at war even when everything around you seems peaceful. And when we talk about transformation, this is where it really begins. Not when the soldier returns home, but when he starts trying to get back to himself. This involves relearning how to trust, how to feel, how to be present. And to do this, courage is needed. Courage to recognize that you need help. Courage to face what was stuck in the past. Courage to not give up on finding yourself, even if the world doesn't understand. It's like rebuilding a house from the inside, brick by brick, while from the outside everything seems whole. It's a silent, intimate, sometimes lonely process, but it's also one of the most powerful journeys anyone can experience, because it's not just about overcoming trauma, it's about reclaiming what the pain tried to erase, your identity, your dignity, your very essence. So when we look at someone and say, "Be strong," perhaps the true gesture of strength is to listen, to be present, to not rush the healing, to respect the soul's time. Daniel is living this journey. He's not there yet, but each step is part of the reconstruction. And if you somehow recognize yourself in this story, even in other contexts, know that you are not alone. Comment here. I'm on this journey too. I really want to know who is walking with us on this invisible road. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because when we talk about the return of someone who has faced war, we are not just describing a beautiful scene with flags and hugs. We are opening a window to something much more complex, the emotional impact of crossing a territory that requires the death of sensitivity in order to survive. Daniel, like so many others, did not just return different. He returned divided, between the man he was before he left and the man he had to become in order to endure what he experienced. During the first week, he tried to maintain a semblance of normality. He played with his son, sat at the table with his family, laughed at the jokes his friends told as if he were completely present. But internally, it was as if he were observing everything from the outside, like a spectator of his own life. There were days when he would spend hours staring at a blank wall, without noticing the passing of time. Other times, all it took was the sound of a door slamming shut for his body to react with tension, as if ready for a new attack. This is what few understand. The most intense battles are not in the minefields, but behind the scenes of the mind. They are the images that return without invitation, the sounds that repeat themselves even in silence, the memories that insist on taking up space in the simplest moments, a shower, a walk, a lost look out the window. What Daniel was facing was an internal war that no one could see, but he felt it, every day, and behind it all, there was a silent demand, the idea that he should be grateful for being back, that everything was okay now. But what does it mean to be okay when your inner reality has completely transformed? When your mindset no longer fits the world you've returned to? Daniel found himself surrounded by people who expected him to be the same, and this expectation was like a trap. The more he tried to live up to what others expected, the more distant he felt from himself. Little by little, he began to distance himself, first from the longer conversations, then from the invitations to go out. And soon came the days when I didn't even get out of bed. Everything seemed to require an immense effort. The simple act of choosing an outfit or having breakfast became an internal battle, because his mind was still occupied with the faces that never returned, with the difficult decisions he had to make, with the screams he heard from fallen comrades that he couldn't save. It was as if the past hadn't stayed in the past. He carried it like an invisible backpack, full of memories that weighed more and more with each passing day. The hardest part was explaining. How could you tell someone that you're not afraid of dying, but of living with pain? That trauma doesn't just come from violent scenes, but from the small choices that leave their mark. Daniel felt ashamed of not being able to go back to being who he was, and this shame made him even more isolated, because deep down he believed that no one would understand. And maybe at that moment he didn't understand either. This is where we need to talk about identity, because war doesn't just take time and energy. It affects the essence of those who experience it. It requires you to turn off emotions, to automate reactions, to make quick decisions in chaotic environments. And when all that is over, there is no off button. The transition from soldier to civilian does not happen overnight. It is a slow reconstruction, full of nuances and difficult choices. And it is in this process that painful questions arise. Who am I now? Why do I react this way? Is there a way back? These are legitimate, human, profound questions. Questions that show that there is something inside Daniel trying to emerge even in the midst of pain. Because deep down, the desire to reconnect with his own essence is still there. The spark has not gone out. It is just covered by layers of intense experiences that are difficult to name. On a quiet afternoon, sitting in the backyard with a cup of coffee in his hands, Daniel watched his son playing with dry leaves. That simple scene moved him. It was as if, for the first time in a long time, he had allowed himself to just watch, without thinking, without running away, without protecting himself. It was brief, but in that moment, something moved inside, a memory of lightness, of who he was before he was heavy. And that was when a new kind of journey began, that of relearning how to feel. It wasn't a magical or cinematic moment. It was real, discreet, silent, but it was true. And it's in this kind of revelation that transformation begins to happen, not with big promises but with small signs that there is still life behind the shield. Because true return is not physical, it's emotional, it's spiritual, it's internal. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because there is something essential that few realize when they look at someone like Daniel. The courage that exists in not giving up, the strength that lies in the simple fact of continuing to wake up even when everything seems gray. The hidden truth about this journey is that it demands much more than combat. It demands facing yourself, looking into the eyes of your own pain, and still choosing to remain. And this choice is not simple. It is not automatic. It is made every second when Daniel takes a deep breath and decides to take a step, when he accepts to sit with Julia on the couch, even though he doesn't know what to say, when he holds his son's hand and walks to the gate, even though his heart is racing. Every small decision like this is a way of saying, I'm still here, and being here is an act of resistance. of reconstruction, of hope. Comment here. That makes sense to me. I really want to know who is feeling this connection. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because there is a huge difference between what the eyes show and what the heart carries in silence. And perhaps, of all the battles Daniel faced, the most challenging began after he crossed the threshold of his home. This is because there are wounds that do not bleed, but remain open. Scars that do not show up in the evidence but are there, alive, pulsing, influencing every decision, every reaction, every breath. For many, this is called post-traumatic stress disorder, but for those who live with it, it's not a technical term, it's a daily reality. It's waking up in the middle of the night with your heart racing without knowing why. It's walking into a supermarket and feeling like every sound is too loud, the aisles too narrow, everything too close. It's living as if something is always about to happen, even when everything around you seems calm. Daniel began to realize this slowly, not with a sudden revelation, but with a constant discomfort, as if he were constantly trying to find a position where he could relax, on the couch, in the bedroom, in conversations, but none of them were enough. His body was there, present, functional, but something deeper, it hadn't returned. The phrase that tormented him the most was simple. The body came back. The soul was stuck somewhere between explosions and goodbyes, and he knew exactly where. At that checkpoint where he lost a friend. At that moment when he had to make a split-second decision. At that glance that met a civilian's and remained etched in his memory like an unsolved enigma. Time passed, but inside him, all of this was still happening in slow motion. The hidden truth is that trauma doesn't respect the calendar. It doesn't understand that months or years have passed. To the brain, certain triggers still mean danger. A noise, a smell, a specific sound, and then without warning, the body reacts. Adrenaline surges, the chest tightens, the throat closes, and it doesn't matter how much you tell yourself, you're safe now, because those who experience it have no control over these responses. They happen before the rational mind can even intervene. It was hard for Daniel to accept this, because he had always seen himself as someone strong, someone trained to resist, to endure, and suddenly there he was, avoiding leaving the house, avoiding crowds, avoiding even his own thoughts. He felt ashamed, and this shame was a second pain, often deeper than the first, because it brought with it a feeling of inadequacy, the idea that he had failed to return to normal. But what is normal after all, after going through something so extreme? It's important to understand that PTSD is not a weakness, it's an adaptation. It's the mind's way of trying to survive what it couldn't process at the time it happened. War taught his body how to survive, but no one taught him how to turn that mode off. No one told him what to do when the shooting stopped, but his heart was still on alert. No one explained how to trust again, to relax, to exist without fear. The transformation he is experiencing now is silent but powerful, because it does not involve defeating an external enemy, but rather reconciling with his own memories, looking inside himself with honesty, allowing himself to feel everything that, for so long, he had to block out. This requires a strength that few can imagine, a courage that is not celebrated with medals, but that sustains every small gesture, getting out of bed, looking in the mirror, accepting help. And at this point in his journey, Daniel begins to realize that he doesn't need to heal everything at once, that you don't need to have all the answers, that it's okay to not be okay all the time. He understands that his scars are part of his story, but they don't define who he is. And most importantly, that there is a possible path, a path that doesn't erase the past, but integrates it, that embraces the pain without drowning in it, that allows for reconstruction, not as a return to what was, but as a rebirth. This change in mindset changes everything, because now he begins to see himself in a different light, no longer as someone who is broken, but as someone in process, someone who has lived through what many would not bear and who, even so, continues to search for meaning. Every time he chooses to speak, even if it is difficult, he is disarming a piece of his fear. Every time he allows himself to cry, he is making room for healing. Every time he says, "I need help," he is in fact saying, "I still believe in myself," and perhaps that is the greatest victory of all. Daniel still has difficult days. He still carries shadows. He still hears the echoes of what he lived. But now he knows he is no longer fighting alone. He is walking a path where vulnerability has become a bridge, where pain has become language, and where life, even full of patches, is still life and worth living. Comment here. That makes sense to me. I want to know who is listening to this with an open heart. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because there are things we don't choose to remember. They simply come back, and they come back with such intense force that they take over our body, our breathing, our present moment. Daniel began to notice this in the details. It wasn't every day, but when it came as an invisible impact. He was washing the dishes and suddenly, the smell of detergent mixed with the metallic smell of blood. He was walking down the street and any noise, a motorcycle, a door slamming, a scream down the street, made his chest race. And for a second he was no longer there. He was back on the battlefield. It's hard to explain this to someone who has never lived it. It's as if memory has a life of its own. As if there were a part of the brain that completely ignores the logic of time. What happened 3 years ago can seem like it's happening now. A simple crack in the room can trigger a chain of memories that come like an avalanche. The smell of gunpowder, the dust in your eyes, the dry sound of footsteps running over gravel. And in the midst of all this, what hurts the most is not remembering what happened. It's reliving the feeling of helplessness. Daniel never said it out loud, but he was terrified of forgetting the face of the person who was left behind. There were nights when he would sit in the dark, just to try to remember the voice of a companion who had fallen into his arms. Sometimes it would come, other times there would only be silence, and that silence weighed like guilt, as if it were wrong to move on, as if being alive was, in itself, an unpayable debt. These memories do not ask for permission. They pass through the present as if they were the masters of time, and the cruelest thing is that they come at the most unexpected moments, during the laughter of a child, the gentle touch of a wife, the warmth of a freshly brewed coffee. Simple things, which should bring peace, sometimes bring back the memory of what was lost, as if the body is trying to protect, but the soul is being pulled back. What if the battlefield never left you, even sleeping in your own bed? This question echoed within Daniel, because for him, the war was not behind him. It was part of his routine. It was in the way he looked out the windows before entering a room. It was in the long silences between one question and another. It was in the difficulty he had in trusting, even in the safest places. It was not paranoia. It was a defense system that activated itself, the result of everything he had to do to survive. The human mind is extraordinary, but also mysterious. It stores pain in hidden compartments, but at some point these compartments open, and when they do, we are not always prepared for what comes out. Sometimes it is just a fragment, a laugh, a phrase, an image, but that is enough to make our heart race. Our breath becomes shallow, and the world seems smaller than it really is. Daniel began to realize that trying to forget was futile. The more I tried to erase, the more vivid those memories became. So he decided to do something different. He started writing things down, not all at once, but little by little. A black notebook, hidden in a drawer, where he wrote down his memories as if he were emptying a basement. Writing didn't solve everything, but it brought a certain relief. It was like giving form to what had previously been just a blur. And little by little he understood that what was suddenly appearing needed to be welcomed, not fought. Because what hurts is not just remembering. What hurts is not having anywhere to put these memories. Daniel's memories didn't disappear, but they began to change color. Before, they had come as nightmares. Now sometimes they came as stories. And telling these stories made him start to listen to himself, too. He began to realize that there were still living parts of him, parts that had resisted even without knowing it. And that, in itself, was a victory. What becomes clear at this point in the journey is that trauma does not have a linear narrative. It is made up of disconnected pieces that emerge at unexpected moments. And the challenge is not to erase them, but to integrate them, to understand that they are part of you, yes, but that they do not need to guide every step. They may be there, but they do not define who you are. Daniel began to learn this. He began to realize that remembering is not a failure, that feeling is not a sign of weakness, that speaking, even when trembling, is an act of courage, and most importantly, that memories that hurt can also be transformed, not into something beautiful, nor into something to be grateful for, but into something that can be understood, something that can be respected, something that little by little loses the power to control. And it is at this point that the mindset begins to change, when he understands that he no longer needs to run away from the images that appear, that he can look at them with compassion, that he can take a deep breath and say, I recognize you, but now it is up to me to decide. Comment here. I'm on this journey too. I really want to know who is walking with us through these memories. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because there is a pain that does not come from the war itself, but from what happens after it. The pain of not being understood. And this is perhaps one of the most silent wounds that someone can carry. Daniel felt this all the time. The world around him saw him as a symbol, an example of strength, a man who survived where many did not return. But inside, he felt smaller and smaller, suffocated by the feeling of not being able to be who he really was, of not being able to show everything he carried inside without being judged or reduced to a caricature. The most painful part wasn't reliving the traumas. It was realizing that when he tried to talk about them, people looked away. Sometimes they tried to change the subject, as if it were more comfortable to pretend everything was fine. Other times they said ready-made phrases as if that were enough to heal deep wounds. You're strong, man. You won. Enjoy life now. The past is the past. But what no one asked was, how are you really feeling? They called me a hero, but they didn't ask me how I felt. This phrase kept echoing in Daniel's mind like an uncomfortable echo, because the image of a hero, while being a tribute, also became a prison. It was as if there was no room for pain, vulnerability, or doubt. As if, having survived, he had an obligation to always be strong, stable, and grateful, but that wasn't how he felt, and this created an internal conflict that no one else saw, a struggle between what was expected of him and who he really was at that moment. How many soldiers are fighting alone after having already won a war? How many are walking in silence, trying to maintain an appearance that no longer corresponds to their own truth? This is a question that needs to be asked urgently, because emotional loneliness cannot be cured with medals. It requires presence, listening, acceptance, and above all, freedom to be human. Daniel tried to fit in. He tried to act as if everything was fine. He went back to the places he used to go, laughed with his friends, pretended he was fine. But each of these gestures came at a high cost, the exhaustion of maintaining a version of himself that was no longer real. He came home exhausted, not from the day itself, but from the effort of appearing whole. Society demands resilience, but it doesn't teach us to embrace fragility. And what it doesn't understand, it judges. That's why Daniel started to keep quiet. He started to keep his anguish to himself, because talking meant explaining too much. And not even he could find the words to translate what was happening inside. It wasn't just sadness. It was a kind of disconnection, as if everything around him was happening on another frequency, while he was trapped in a parallel reality, slower, heavier, darker. This emotional isolation is not exclusive to soldiers, but for those who have been through extreme experiences like Daniel's, it intensifies, because there is a rupture that is difficult to repair. He came back with memories that no one around him has. He saw things that no one should see. And when he tries to return to a world that has not experienced any of this, everything seems out of place. The conversations, the trivial problems, even the compliments, everything seems out of place. What hurt the most was the feeling of being seen but not noticed, of being praised but not heard, of being remembered for actions that no one asked how they cost. He knew that many people admired him, but few cared to get to know the man behind the uniform. The father, the husband, the human being who needed more than anything to be treated with humanity. It is at this point in the journey that the need for reconstruction arises, not only from soldier to civilian, but from the invisible to the visible, from silence to dialogue, from frozen image to living presence. And it starts from within, when Daniel accepts that he no longer needs to pretend, that you can allow yourself to be vulnerable, even if the world is not ready for it. This decision marks the beginning of a new mindset, one that breaks with the pattern of hiding pain to appear strong, one that understands that true strength lies in recognizing one's own limits, not in denying them, that being a man, being a warrior, being a survivor, also includes feeling, crying, hesitating, and above all, it includes the freedom to say, I'm not okay, and that's legitimate. Daniel realizes that part of the healing will not come from others. It will come from the way he starts to look at himself, with more kindness, with less pressure, with the awareness that being hurt does not make him less worthy, less valuable, less of a man, and that no one needs to carry something that weighs so much alone. But to do so, he needs to take a courageous step, abandon the image of perfection, and embrace the truth with everything it brings. This transformation is not instantaneous, it is a process, a path full of twists and turns, good days and bad. But it is a possible path, and when you find someone who just listens, without judging, everything starts to change. Because what heals the most are not answers, but presence. They are not ready-made solutions, but safe spaces to be who you are, without filters. Comment here. That makes sense to me. I really want to know who has also felt this pain of not being understood. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because there is a critical point in this journey that few see, but which is where many things begin to break inside. The moment when pain becomes a secret, when asking for help feels like a failure, when silence begins to feel safer than any words. It was exactly like that with Daniel. He felt the pain growing, he felt the emptiness spreading inside his chest, but he didn't say anything, not because he didn't want to, but because he didn't know how. Because the fear of appearing weak was greater than the desire to be understood. From a very young age, he learned that men don't cry, that soldiers don't tremble, that warriors don't retreat, and these seemingly harmless phrases became invisible bars around his soul, a prison built with expectations that weren't his, but that he carried as if they were. At first he would still try to rehearse some speech. "It's all a bit confusing," he would say. Or he would say something like, "Some days are hard," but no one really listened. People would respond with that automatic smile, change the subject, or say, "It'll pass, it just needs time." And with that, Daniel would keep quiet a little longer, until he reached a point where silence was already part of him, a habit, a form of armor. But silence has its own weight, a weight that builds up, compressing itself inside. It can't be measured in words, but it can be felt in the body, in the shoulders that are always tense, in the stomach that is tight, in the chest that is half-breathing. Suffering, when it has nowhere to go, begins to overflow in other forms. Irritability, tiredness, insomnia, detachment. It's not just sadness, it's a silent exhaustion, as if everything is working, but at its limit. Daniel lived this way for a long time. He spent his days trying to appear whole, and his nights trying not to fall apart. The fear of appearing vulnerable became a cycle. He suffered in silence, and by suffering in silence, he felt more and more alone. And the more alone he felt, the more distant help seemed. He began to believe that no one would understand, that there was no point in talking, that it was better to hold on. But holding on, at that stage, was no longer an act of strength. It was a slow way of disappearing inside, until something unexpected happened. A white envelope with no return address arrived. Inside was a simple letter, a few lines, written in a firm hand. "You are not alone. I have been where you are. And when I decided to speak up, that is when I started coming back to myself. If you want to talk, I am here." No signature, just a phone number. That disarmed Daniel in a way no conversation had ever done before, because that letter didn't come with judgment, nor with ready-made advice. It came with truth, with empathy, with presence. He didn't call that same day, or the next day, but he kept the paper in his wallet, and every time he felt like he was about to sink, he would take out that piece of paper and read it again, until, weeks later, he called. The voice on the other end was simple, calm, unhurried. It was someone who spoke little, but knew how to listen. And for the first time in a long time, Daniel spoke. Not everything, but enough to break the cycle. That conversation opened a path. From there he was introduced to a support group made up of other veterans, men who, like him, carried scars that no one else could see. The first meeting was uncomfortable. He barely said anything, but just being there was a step in itself. The environment was different from anything he had ever known. No one there wanted to appear strong. There was no competition, no comparison. There was listening. There was sharing. There was silence, but a silence different from the one he had known. A silence of acceptance, not of abandonment. There, Daniel began to understand that asking for help is not a sign of weakness. It is, in fact, one of the bravest decisions anyone can make, because recognizing that you cannot do it alone requires maturity. It requires awareness. And most importantly, it requires humility. The kind of humility that liberates, that transforms, that initiates healing. He realized that the fear of appearing fragile is a subtle poison, and that many men have been taught to die inside so as not to show weakness on the outside. But what kills us silently is, in fact, what most needs to be named. Because when pain finds a voice, it begins to lose its power to dominate us. The hidden truth behind silence is that it feeds on isolation, but the revealing truth is that the simple act of saying, "I need help," can be the beginning of a journey of reconnection, not with the old version of who we were, but with a more whole version of who we can be. Comment here. I'm on this journey too. I want to know who else has carried this silence too heavy to go on alone. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because there is a moment when the silence begins to break, and not because everything suddenly became lighter, but because something inside decides, with effort and courage, to no longer carry this weight alone. The journey of reconstruction does not begin with grand gestures. It often begins with the simple, but powerful, act of saying, "I need help," and accepting that there is something beyond the pain. It was exactly like that with Daniel. The conversation he had with that veteran, the one who wrote the letter, wasn't a magical cure, but it was a turning point. It was there that he felt, for the first time in a long time, that it was possible to exist in a place where he didn't have to pretend. From that contact on, other doors opened. One of those doors was therapy, and even though he was afraid, Daniel decided to face it. He entered the office still carrying the old mentality. "I'll just try it, see how it goes." But it only took the first session for him to realize that there were too many things bottled up, and that he needed, yes, a space to start letting go. The psychologist didn't have ready answers, but she was patient. She listened, and little by little, through frank conversations and a process full of ups and downs, Daniel began to weave the threads of his story together in a way he had never done before. She began to name feelings he didn't even know he had. He began to understand that what he was feeling wasn't madness or weakness. It was a true reflection of everything he had experienced, a reflection of the brutal impact of war on the body and mind of someone who was simply trying to survive. But the process didn't stop there. He was introduced to a support group where other veterans shared their own journeys, and there, among different men with similar stories, Daniel found something that individual therapy couldn't offer: relatability. He didn't need to explain every feeling because all he had to do was look into the eyes of others to know that they, too, knew the same weight. And that created a rare kind of acceptance, the kind that comes from shared silence, from pain that doesn't need translation. And then came sports, something he had put aside years ago. It was at one of the group meetings that they invited him to participate in a symbolic race, organized by family members and veterans. He almost refused, but ended up going. He didn't run fast. He didn't finish among the first. But he felt the wind on his face, the sweat running down his back, his body responding, present. And then he realized he was still alive, not just surviving, but living. And that awakened something new. He started exercising more often, not as an escape, but as a way to reconnect with his own body, a way to get out of his mind, even if only for a few minutes. Another unexpected channel was art. Writing had been part of his process since that old hidden notebook. But now, encouraged by one of his colleagues in the group, he began to transform these writings into open letters, words addressed to no one and everyone at the same time, sincere, raw, intense texts. And this became a practice, writing not to hide pain, but to expose it to the light. Because when pain is spoken, it begins to lose control. Faith, which had long been left in the background, was also subtly revived, not with grand rituals, but with small gestures. A silent prayer before going to sleep, a conversation with God on days of anguish, a verse scribbled in a diary, nothing forced, nothing mechanical, just the search for something that was beyond him, beyond the pain, something that would remind him that there was still meaning, even if he didn't fully understand it. And this is where we understand the true meaning of the phrase, "Every unseen scar is a bridge between the past and the courage to move on." Because Daniel began to understand that scars are not just reminders of pain, but also marks of resistance. They prove that he went through something that could have destroyed him, but didn't. He was still here, and this here was different from the old one, but no less valuable. It was more conscious, more attentive, more true. This reconstruction was not linear. There were setbacks, days when he wanted to give up, days when everything seemed to be back to square one. But now he had the tools, he had people around him. He had learned that he didn't have to face everything alone, and that changed everything. The most important thing was not to go back to who he was before the war. It was to discover who he was becoming now, after everything. A new man, with new perceptions, with deep scars, but also with the ability to love, to start over, to trust again. This is the part of the journey that few value, the silent path that each person takes in their own time. The construction of a new mindset, made up of small daily choices, that together build something solid. A new vision of oneself, a new way of inhabiting the world, and most importantly, a new way of looking at wounds, not as something to hide, but as part of the testimony that can transform other lives too. Comment here. That makes sense to me. I want to know who has also felt that they are learning to build something new, even while carrying the marks of what once was. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because after all the pain, after the silence, after the weight of not being understood, there is something that begins to sprout slowly, almost imperceptibly, hope, and not that fanciful hope that promises that everything will be perfect, that the past will disappear as if it had never existed, but a real hope, silent, that is born between the cracks and grows, even in the midst of fear. Daniel didn't become a new man overnight. And to be honest, he didn't even want to go back to being the way he was before, because now he understood that all the pain he had been through didn't have to be an eternal burden. It could be a seed. He still carried the scars, yes, but now they had meaning. They were marks of someone who chose not to give up, who chose to keep going, who chose to come home and come back to you. Little by little, he began to realize that it was possible to live with all that, with the traumas, with the memories, with the longing for what was lost, but not just to survive, to live, find purpose, rebuild bonds, relearn to trust touch, time, people. He began to listen to his son more, pay attention to the details of the house, allow himself to laugh without guilt. And when the memories came, because they still came, he no longer ran away. He took a deep breath. He welcomed them. He let them pass. This transformation was not a happy ending. It was a new beginning, a path where he understood that he did not need to be whole to be worthy of love, that the cracks did not make him fragile, but true. That is what being human is, a being complex, contradictory, but also full of possibility. The impact of the war did not erase his essence. It only covered, for a time, the beauty that still existed within him. And the most beautiful thing was realizing that, by accepting his own pain, Daniel became a bridge for other people. People who, like him, also came back with their souls in pieces and didn't know where to start. He didn't set himself up as an example. He set himself up as a presence, as someone willing to listen, to be there, to walk alongside those who are still trying to get back on their feet. Because he understood that the most valuable thing we can offer to others is not an answer, but company. Today, he writes letters. He helps new veterans in his support group. Sometimes he participates in conversation circles at schools, where he talks about what it means to be truly strong. He talks about what he has learned, that the opposite of weakness is not resistance. It is humanity. It is being able to say, "This hurts," and still keep going. It is being able to admit, "I'm not okay," and still take a step forward. It is looking in the mirror, seeing all the scars, and understanding that each one carries a story of overcoming. The phrase he holds dearest today is one he wrote himself and stuck on his bedroom wall. "I'm back home, and today, little by little, something inside me is coming back." This phrase is a daily reminder, a reminder that no matter how much the world has torn him apart, there is something inside him that continues to beat, something that still believes in love, in peace, in rebuilding. And perhaps this is the greatest revelation of all, that even when everything seems lost, it is still possible to find yourself, that even when the scars seem irreversible, there is still beauty, there is still chance, there is still a path, and that this path does not need to be walked alone. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because hope, when it becomes presence, generates transformation. Daniel continued on his path, no longer to forget what he experienced, but to give meaning to what he had experienced. He began to transform pain into direction, to use what seemed like a sentence as a new mission. He discovered that he could love again, not just others, but himself. He stopped beating himself up for not being the same as before, and started respecting the man he had become. He learned to honor what he felt, to accept that his soul had new contours. They weren't flaws, they were sacred territories, mapped out by experience. Conversations with his son began to have a different meaning. When Miguel asked about the war, Daniel no longer evaded. He answered truthfully, but also with sensitivity. He showed that courage is not the absence of pain, but the willingness to carry on even when afraid. And there, between an innocent question and a measured answer, A new connection was born between father and son, one that was made of presence, listening, and bonding. Daniel also learned to cultivate pauses, moments when he didn't need to produce, explain, or appear strong. He just needed to breathe, feel the sun on his face, listen to an old record, take care of the plants in the backyard. Small things, but they brought him back to the present. And in that present moment, he recognized himself, not as someone who is ready, but as someone who is present, alive, capable. Comment here. I'm on this journey too. I want to know who else is on this path of rebuilding from within, even with all the scars. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because there has come a significant moment in this journey when Daniel's story is no longer just about him. It begins to touch each and every one of us, because it's not just about soldiers who have returned from war. It's about anyone who at some point felt like they no longer had a voice, who tried to scream inside but the world didn't hear, who wanted to ask for help but couldn't find the courage, or the space, or anyone. The truth is that there are many Daniels out there, people who carry the weight of the invisible, who wake up every day trying to appear strong, while inside they are falling apart. People who have learned to smile even when their souls are exhausted, who are always trying to keep their routine going while their hearts are still stumbling over memories, traumas, and questions that have never been answered. And the hardest part? Most of them believe they are alone. That's why telling this story matters. Because when one voice is raised, it invites others to do the same. When someone is brave enough to speak about their pain, it creates a safe space for others to speak up too. And sometimes that's all someone needs. A place where they can be heard without judgment. A place where they don't have to pretend they're okay. Where they don't have to have all the answers or hide their scars. Daniel understood this over time. He realized that the greatest gift he received throughout his reconstruction was not a solution, nor a medicine, nor a ready-made formula. It was listening, the respectful silence of those who simply stood by his side, even without understanding everything, the presence of those who did not try to fix him but simply welcomed him. And that is what he strives to offer now. Presence. Maybe you know someone like this. Someone who came back from a war you never saw, but you can tell something has changed. Maybe they didn't even go to a literal war, but they did experience a loss, a breakup, a deep pain. And since then, something about them has changed. They smile less. They're quieter. They avoid conversations. Or maybe you're that person, the one who carries everything inside, trying to find a space where you can just breathe. If this is your case, or if you know someone like this, your voice can make a difference. Sometimes a comment, a shared story, a phrase left here can be what someone else needed to read to stop feeling so alone. Don't underestimate the strength of what you carry. Your experience has value. Your pain has a name. Your journey can be the beginning of someone's transformation. Because in the end, it's not just about Daniel. It's about everyone who has ever felt broken in some way and started one day at a time to put themselves back together. It's about those who have come back from dark places and learned to live with the light and the shadow. It's about all of us who are still trying to get back, not just to a physical home, but to a place of belonging within. And this conversation doesn't end here. It continues in small gestures, in the choice to not be silent, in the silent support you offer to others, in the care you learn to have for yourself. Together we can be the safe home for those who are still trying to return. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because this network we are forming here, made of empathy, memory, and voice, can grow. It can expand. It can reach someone who is now silent, thinking they no longer have a place in the world. It can be a bridge, and every bridge begins with a gesture, listening, welcoming, being there. It doesn't matter if you are the one in need or the one offering. Every true presence has the power to transform. Daniel never imagined that his pain would one day become meaningful, but that's exactly what happened. Because when pain is acknowledged and shared, it becomes a journey. And every journey, even a difficult one, takes us to a new place. A place where we no longer need to hide what we feel, where we are not defined by what we experience, but by what we choose to do with it. What if everything we are saying here could be, for someone, that point of light in the middle of the darkness? What if your story, your listening, or even your empathetic silence could be what keeps someone from giving up? Sometimes, giving someone a voice is simply offering a space where they can exist, where they don't have to be strong all the time, where they can say, "I'm trying too," and find acceptance, instead of judgment. That's what humanizes us. That's what rebuilds us as a community. And perhaps deep down that's our mission, to transform pain into a bridge, silence into care, scars into paths. Comment here. That makes sense to me. I want to know who else is willing to be that place of listening and courage for someone who has not yet been able to ask for help. If you've made it this far, truly, thank you. It means that this story touched you somewhere deep down inside, and perhaps it awakened memories, reflections, or even that silence that we learn to keep. This shows that you value content that speaks to the soul, that doesn't just pass by the surface. And if that's the case, this channel is also your space. A place for us to continue building these invisible bridges between pain and the possibility of starting over. If this video spoke to you, if it made sense at any point, leave a comment here saying, "I'm with you until the end." This is how I will know that you have walked with me this far, that you have listened to every part, and that we are, even from a distance, sharing something that matters. Take advantage and leave your like, not out of obligation, but because this gesture helps keep this exchange alive. It helps spread this conversation to those who may need to hear exactly this today, in silence on the other side of the screen. And if you want to follow this journey with me, subscribe to the channel. With each new video, the intention is the same, to tell real stories with humanity, with truth, with space to feel and breathe. There is a video here on the side that complements this subject. Click and continue with me there. The conversation is not over yet.